Did you know that holding on to certain belongings of someone who has passed away could actually be preventing their soul from finding eternal rest? Saint Teresa of Avila revealed in her mystical writings 5 specific objects that no Christian should keep. Could any of them be in your home right now, without you even realizing it? In the silence of her cell at the convent of Saint Joseph in Avila, Saint Teresa received a revelation that would forever change our understanding of the bond between the living and the dead. During one of her deep mystical ecstasies, she was shown how certain physical possessions left behind by the departed can act as invisible chains, tying their souls to this world and blocking their passage into the eternal light of the Father. The doctor of the Church did not write this by accident. She was moved by a burning compassion, both for the souls in purgatory and for us, her brothers and sisters in faith, who may unknowingly be prolonging the suffering of those we love most. Today, you will discover 5 specific objects that, according to Saint Teresa, no Christian should ever keep from a deceased loved one. If you want to help the souls of those dear to you reach their eternal rest, write in the comments, "Saint Teresa, intercede for my departed." Do not turn off this video before you hear the 5th object, because that final revelation contains the exact prayer Saint Teresa taught for setting souls free. Every minute of this message holds truths you need to hear before applying it in your own home. Before we continue, take a moment to honor the memory of those who have gone before us. Give this video a like if you wish for their souls to soon be in the presence of God, and subscribe if you want to join in praying for the souls in purgatory. It was the year 1562 when Teresa of Avila, already transformed into Teresa of Jesus, experienced one of the most profound mystical ecstasies of her contemplative life. In her interior castle, she herself describes how the Lord permitted her to see the condition of souls after death. What she witnessed shook her to tears. But it was not only the sufferings of purgatory that she witnessed. It was something far more subtle, more painful, and far closer to home. She saw souls standing at a threshold between light and shadow, unable to move forward into full purification. And when she asked what was causing this delay, the answer she received was as unexpected as it was precise. Material objects kept by their loved ones on earth were acting as invisible threads, holding those souls back. Saint Teresa understood in that moment a truth the Church has always known, yet rarely explained with such clarity. Love that holds on too tightly can become a chain for the soul. We are not speaking here of holy remembrance, of cherishing a loved one's memory, or of the legitimate veneration of relics of the saints. This is something altogether different. Something that happens quietly in our own homes when we hold on to certain personal belongings of those who have died. The saint did not write these revelations to frighten us. She wrote them to set us free. She knew that millions of Christians, moved by the most genuine love, keep their loved ones' possessions without imagining the spiritual consequences of doing so. That is why, in her private letters to the prioresses of Carmelite convents, she left precise instructions about 5 types of objects that must never remain in the possession of the living. The first of these objects is the most common, the most seemingly innocent, the one that nearly every Catholic family keeps without question: the jewelry and personal adornments that the deceased wore on a daily basis. We are talking about wedding rings, chains with medals, earrings, bracelets, watches, brooches, hair combs, objects that touch the skin of the loved one day after day, absorbing their vital energy, silently witnessing their joys and sorrows. Saint Teresa explains that these metal objects, especially those containing gold or silver, act as receptacles of the departed's sensory memory. This is not superstition or folk magic. It is a spiritual principle that Catholic mysticism has recognized for centuries. Matter can retain impressions of the soul that inhabited or repeatedly touched it. And when these objects remain in the hands of the living, especially when worn or displayed, They create a bond that prevents the soul from fully releasing its earthly identity. Imagine for a moment the wedding ring of your late husband kept in your jewelry box, or perhaps still on your own finger. Every time you look at it, every time you touch it, you are unknowingly sending a silent call to his soul. And that soul, which should be focused on its purification, on its gradual journey toward the divine light, feels that call as a tug pulling it backward, back toward the earth, back toward you. Your love is not the problem. The object itself has become an anchor preventing that soul from sailing toward its eternal destination. Saint Teresa's revelation about this first object did not arise from theological speculation. It came from what she actually saw in her visions: luminous souls standing still, looking back, unable to take the final step toward the Father's dwelling place because something was calling to them from the material world. And when the saint asked what that something was, she saw with startling clarity the jewelry glinting in the hands of widows, children, and siblings who kept it out of love. Here we must make a crucial distinction that Teresa herself established. Not every object belonging to the deceased has this effect. Items used only occasionally, those that were not closely tied to the person's bodily identity, may be kept without concern. But those adornments worn every single day, items the person never took off, that were inseparable from who they were, those are the ones that create the dangerous bond. How do you know which ones qualify? Ask yourself, did my loved one wear this every day? Did they sleep in it? Was it a defining part of how they looked? If the answer is yes, then that object falls into the category Saint Teresa revealed: the wedding ring never removed, the chain with the medal worn since childhood, the earrings always present, the watch consulted every hour. These are the objects that hold. And perhaps right now, as you listen to these words, you are thinking of that one item you have kept. Perhaps you are wearing it at this very moment. Perhaps it sits on your bedside table beside a photograph, a small private altar to the memory of someone you loved deeply. And you may be feeling a mixture of resistance and recognition. Resistance, because letting go feels like a betrayal. Recognition, because something deep within you senses that this revelation rings true. Saint Teresa understood that resistance. That is precisely why she never issued commands. She simply shed light. She showed us the truth and trusted that our genuine love, the love that desires the eternal good of the other, rather than our own temporary comfort, would move us to act rightly. Because keeping that ring, that chain, that brooch does not honor the departed. Without meaning to, it holds them at the very threshold of heaven. And this is only the first of the 5 objects Saint Teresa revealed. The remaining 4 are even more surprising, more unexpected, and more present in our homes than you might imagine. After revealing the spiritual danger of personal jewelry, Saint Teresa went deeper into a second type of object which, according to her mystical visions, has an even more intimate and unsettling effect on the soul of the departed. This object is found in almost every home where someone has passed away. We fold it carefully, tuck it into wardrobes, and occasionally take it out just to hold it, to feel, however briefly, that our loved one is still near. We are talking about the clothing and personal garments of the deceased. The doctor of the church was very specific on this point. She was not referring to just any piece of clothing. She meant the garments worn directly against the skin: shirts, blouses, underwear, socks, pajamas, dressing gowns, nightwear, personal towels, anything that was in prolonged and repeated contact with the body. Items that absorbed the warmth, the scent, and the most immediate physical essence of the person we lost. In one of her letters to Mother Maria de San Jose, prioress of the Seville convent, Saint Teresa wrote about a recently deceased nun whose biological sister, also a religious, had kept the deceased's habit and inner tunic as a keepsake. For weeks, this sister experienced deeply disturbing dreams in which she saw the deceased walking naked, searching for something, repeating over and over, "Give me back what is mine." Only when the confessor ordered those garments to be burned with prayer and holy water did the dreams cease and the living sister find her peace again. This account is not an isolated anecdote. Saint Teresa included it in her correspondence precisely because it illustrates a profound spiritual principle. The clothing we wear absorbs not only our scent and our warmth, but something of our animating presence, our identity as a person. When someone dies and their clothing remains stored away, especially in the same home where they once lived, it creates a kind of spiritual echo of their earthly presence. We are not speaking of ghosts or apparitions. This is something far more subtle. The soul of the departed, in the midst of its purification in purgatory, perceives those garments as an extension of its body still lingering on earth. And that perception creates confusion, a sense of incompleteness, as though part of the self remained tethered to the material world. Many widows keep their husband's favorite shirt. Many mothers hold on to the blouse their daughter wore every Sunday. Many children preserve the pajamas their father slept in night after night. They do so out of the purest love, the desire to keep the presence of their loved one alive, to have something tangible that still carries their scent, their memory. But what they do not realize is that this very act of love becomes an obstacle to the soul's freedom. Saint Teresa explained that detachment from material things is one of the soul's fundamental tasks in purgatory. There, every soul must progressively release every earthly attachment, every identification with its former life, in order to enter, purified, into the presence of God. But when its most intimate belongings remain on earth, especially in the hands of those who loved it most, that process of letting go becomes slower, more painful, more difficult. Imagine your soul has already left this world. You are in a state of purification, gradually coming to understand the fleeting nature of all earthly things, preparing yourself to behold the face of Christ. But then you become aware that your clothing, those garments that were like a second skin for so many years, still exists in the world, still touched and held and wept over by those who love you. That awareness pulls your attention back. It draws you toward your physical identity at the very moment you most need to be releasing it in order to embrace your eternal identity. This is the spiritual effect Saint Teresa witnessed in her visions. And that is why she insisted, with the firm, maternal love of someone who truly cares, that these garments must not be kept. This is not about discarding them carelessly or forgetting the person who wore them. It is about understanding that real love desires the good of the other, not our own consolation. And the good of that soul is to move forward toward God unhindered, not to remain tethered by invisible threads to a world it has already left behind. The resistance we feel at the thought of parting with that clothing is entirely understandable. It is deeply human. It is grief reaching for something solid to hold on to. But Saint Teresa invites us to transform that grief into a higher expression of love. The love that releases, that says, "I love you so much that I want you to be completely free, even if that means I no longer have anything of yours to touch." There are families who have preserved entire wardrobes belonging to the deceased, unable to donate or part with a single item. Years pass, and those clothes remain there, untouched, a private museum of someone who is no longer present in body. And all the while, the soul in purgatory continues to perceive the clothing as part of an unfinished earthly identity. Saint Teresa's teaching on this second object is not meant to create guilt, but awareness. It is not about judging those who have kept these garments out of love. It is about understanding that now, with this knowledge, we have the opportunity to do something different, something that truly helps the soul of our loved one complete its journey toward the light. And if this second object has already given you pause, already caused you to think about what you have at home, prepare yourself. because the third object Saint Teresa revealed is even closer, even more ordinary, something you likely encounter every single day without ever suspecting that it may be keeping the soul of your loved one from moving on. The third object Saint Teresa identified in her mystical revelations is perhaps the most unexpected and the most difficult to accept, precisely because it is so woven into our everyday lives that we would never think to question it. In fact, most Catholic families display it proudly in their homes, believing it honors the deceased and keeps their memory alive. We are talking about photographs of a departed loved one placed in specific locations within the house. We must be very clear here, because Saint Teresa did not condemn photographs as such. The Church has never forbidden keeping images of those we have lost. What the saint revealed was something far more specific and subtle: the spiritual danger of placing a photograph of the deceased in certain spaces within the home in a way that turns it into an improvised altar, especially when that image becomes the focal point of a form of devotion that belongs only to God and to the saints. In her book of the Foundations, Saint Teresa recounts the case of a noble family in Avila who, following the death of their patriarch, placed a large portrait in the main reception room. It was surrounded by candles, freshly renewed flowers, and the dead man's personal belongings. Each evening, the family would gather before this portrait to speak to their father, to ask his protection, to consult him about important decisions. Over time, several family members began to experience unsettling phenomena: a constant feeling of being watched, recurring dreams in which the father appeared distressed, and two of the children developed a deep, inexplicable melancholy with no apparent medical cause. When Saint Teresa visited that home and looked upon that domestic altar dedicated to the deceased, she immediately understood what was happening. It was not that the father's soul was appearing or tormenting his children. It was that the family had unknowingly created such a powerful spiritual anchor that the soul of the departed could not fully detach from his earthly identity. Every prayer directed at his image, every conversation held before his portrait, every candle lit as though he were a canonized saint. Each of these acted as a kind of invocation that kept him spiritually fixed in the home. The saint ordered the portrait removed from its place of honor, the perpetual candles extinguished, and all those prayers redirected toward the true saints and toward Christ, asking for the repose of the father's soul, but without addressing him directly, as if he were already a heavenly intercessor. Within a few weeks, the disturbing phenomena ceased, and the family found their peace restored. This teaching does not mean we should destroy every photograph of our loved ones. It means we should honestly examine how and where we place them. A photograph in a family album or a modest framed photo among other family pictures does not create this spiritual problem. The problem arises when the photograph of the deceased becomes an object of domestic worship. Do you have a large photograph of a departed loved one displayed in a prominent place in your home? Is it surrounded by candles, flowers, or personal effects? Do you speak to that image when you pray? Do you feel you need to consult it or ask it for protection? If the answer to any of these is yes, then that photographic arrangement has become the third object Saint Teresa identified as spiritually dangerous. The danger does not lie in the love that motivates it. The danger lies in the spiritual confusion it generates. When we treat the deceased as though they were already a canonized saint, as though they have the power of direct intercession, as though they should remain spiritually active in our home, we are preventing their soul from focusing on its own purification. Without realizing it, we are assigning them a task that does not belong to them, to remain our earthly protector, when their only task now is to be purified in order to see God. Testimonies gathered by the Discalced Carmelites in the centuries following Saint Teresa confirm this pattern time and again. Families who found peace once they dismantled photographic altars dedicated to the deceased. Widows who stopped having anguished dreams once they moved a husband's photograph from the center of the home to a private album. Mothers who felt an inexplicable sense of relief when they stopped speaking directly to an image of their deceased child and began instead to pray for him, directing their prayers to Christ and to Our Lady. Saint Teresa was insistent. We must honor the memory of our departed, but we must not make an idol of it. We must remember them with love, but not turn them into household idols. We must pray for them, not to them as though they were already glorified in heaven. This distinction is crucial, and many Catholic families have quietly lost sight of it. A photograph placed appropriately, without pretensions of an altar, without permanent candles, without becoming the devotional centerpiece of the home, creates no spiritual problem whatsoever. But when that image becomes the emotional and spiritual center of gravity of an entire household, when it displaces the crucifix or the image of Our Lady as the focal point of family prayer, then it becomes an invisible chain for the soul of the departed. Consider it from the perspective of the soul in purgatory. Imagine you are in the process of purification, learning to release your earthly identity, your role as father, mother, husband, wife, so that you can take on your eternal identity as a child of God. But you are constantly aware that on earth, people are still invoking you, speaking to you, expecting you to continue in your former family role. That constant invocation distracts you, confuses you, and prevents you from advancing in your journey of detachment. This is the spiritual effect of the third object, according to Saint Teresa's revelation. Now that you know it, you can honestly examine whether your own home contains that photographic altar, which, though born of the purest love, has quietly become, without any intention on your part, an obstacle to the freedom of the soul you love so deeply. But there are still two more objects to reveal. And the fourth is particularly delicate because it involves something sacred, something we would struggle to imagine as problematic, the devotional objects the deceased used in their own prayer life. We now come to the fourth object revealed by Saint Teresa, and this is perhaps the hardest for the Catholic heart to accept, because it involves something we consider holy, something we venerate, something that seems impossible to imagine as a spiritual obstacle. We are speaking of the personal devotional objects the deceased used in their prayer life, their rosary, their Bible, their holy cards, their bedside crucifix, their prayer book, their scapular. The resistance that rises within us when we hear this is immediate and understandable. How could it be problematic to keep the rosary our mother prayed with every night? How could holding on to the Bible our father read each morning cause any spiritual harm? These objects have been blessed, they have been instruments of grace, they accompanied our loved one on their journey of faith. Should we not treasure them as precious relics of that faith? Saint Teresa answered this question with a fundamental theological distinction that many Catholics are unaware of. There is a profound difference between the relics of canonized saints and the devotional objects of ordinary people, no matter how holy those people may have been in life. The belongings of canonized saints have been approved by the Church as instruments of grace because those souls are already in the glory of God. Their purification is complete, and therefore their belongings can be venerated without any spiritual risk. But the devotional objects of our departed loved one, however pious they were in life, do not carry that status. Those souls, except in the rarest of cases, are still in the process of purification in purgatory. And keeping their prayer objects as though they were sacred relics creates a subtle but real spiritual problem. It confuses the order of intercession and keeps the soul bound to its concrete, earthly spiritual identity at the very moment it should be transcending it. In her conceptions of the love of God, Saint Teresa explained that every soul in purgatory must pass through a stage of detachment, not only from sin and worldly attachments, but also from the specific forms their spiritual life took on earth. The rosary was a holy instrument for drawing closer to God, but it is not God. The Bible was the living Word, but the soul must now encounter the Word directly, without the mediation of printed pages. Particular devotions were scaffolding used to build the life of faith, but now the soul must enter the building itself, the living presence of God, leaving the scaffolding behind. When we keep the deceased's rosary and pray with it ourselves, or when we preserve their Bible as an almost magical object connecting us to them, or when we place their holy cards on our home altar and handle them with special reverence because they belonged to Mom, we are creating an inverted devotional bond. Instead of using those objects to pray for the soul of the departed by turning to God, we subtly begin to feel we are praying with the deceased, that their spiritual presence is somehow tied to those objects, that touching them connects us to the person themselves. Saint Teresa observed this repeatedly in the convents. Nuns who kept the rosary of a deceased sister and felt, as they prayed it, that they were accompanied by her. Novices who preserved the breviary of their late teacher and experienced the sense that she was still guiding them spiritually. In every case, the saint identified the same problem. The souls of those deceased religious could not complete their detachment because their living sisters were keeping them anchored through those devotional objects. The solution Saint Teresa proposed was not to destroy those sacred objects. That would be deeply disrespectful. The solution was to return them to the church, where a priest could direct them to liturgical use, or to have them freshly blessed and given to charitable works, where they would lose their character as personal belongings and simply become instruments of universal devotion. A rosary is a rosary. A Bible is the Word of God. A crucifix is the image of Christ. These objects carry no power in themselves beyond what God's grace confers upon them. But when we load them with emotional memory, when we treat them as Dad's rosary, rather than simply a rosary, when we keep them not primarily for their devotional value, but for their sentimental one, then they become the fourth type of object Saint Teresa identified as spiritually problematic. The testimony of Teresa Lopez, a widow from Salamanca in the 16th century, illustrates this teaching with painful clarity. For 3 years after her husband's death, she kept the crucifix that had stood beside his deathbed. She placed it in her own room and each night before sleeping would kiss it and speak to her husband as though he could hear her through that object. She developed the habit of consulting it about decisions, of asking it for signs, of treating it as a channel of communication with the departed. When she finally sought spiritual counsel from Saint Teresa, troubled by disturbing dreams and a melancholy that would not lift, the saint identified the problem immediately. She asked her to give that crucifix to the parish, to obtain a new one for her own devotion, and to redirect all her prayers for her husband directly to Christ, without using objects as emotional intermediaries. Teresa Lopez resisted with everything she had. Giving up that crucifix felt like betraying her husband, like abandoning him, letting him go. But Saint Teresa explained it to her with patient, motherly clarity. You do not forget him by letting go of his crucifix. You set him free. Your husband does not need you to remember him through objects. He needs you to pray for him by turning to God, not to the things he once touched. True love releases. It does not cling. When Teresa Lopez finally gave the crucifix away and began to pray properly for her husband, the change was immediate. The disturbing dreams ceased, the melancholy lifted, and a deep peace rose up within her, an inexplicable sense of certainty that her husband was now freer, closer to God, and at rest. This is the liberating effect of releasing the fourth object. And now that you know the first four, you are about to encounter the most delicate of all, the one that stirs the greatest emotional resistance, the one almost nobody would ever imagine needs to be let go. The fifth object Saint Teresa revealed with tears in her eyes. We have arrived at the fifth and final object revealed by Saint Teresa of Avila, and this is the most delicate, the most intimate, the one that causes the deepest resistance when it is named. The saint herself wrote about it with tears, fully aware of the pain this truth would cause, in the hearts of those who have lost someone they love. But she also knew that remaining silent out of a misguided sense of compassion would be the greater cruelty, because it would leave souls chained when they could be set free. The fifth object is the physical remains of the deceased that some people keep in their homes: locks of hair, nail clippings, teeth, ashes kept outside of the appropriate liturgical context, or any bodily fragment that once belonged to the loved one's body. It also includes objects that were in prolonged direct contact with bodily fluids: handkerchiefs with preserved tears, unwashed clothing kept for sentimental reasons, or bandages saved from a final illness. The immediate reaction to this revelation is usually one of incomprehension and grief. How could it be harmful to keep a lock of my child's hair? What is wrong with preserving a curl of my mother's as a keepsake? These practices seem harmless, even tender, entirely legitimate expressions of grief and of a love that does not die with physical separation. Saint Teresa understood these feelings completely. She herself had experienced the devastating grief of losing loved ones, including her own mother when Teresa was still a young child. But precisely because she knew the overwhelming force of grief, she felt it necessary to warn of the gravest spiritual danger associated with this fifth type of object. In her book of her life, the saint recounts a vision that marked her deeply. She beheld the state of a soul in purgatory that had gone decades without advancing in its purification. When she asked what had caused such a prolonged stagnation, she was shown a scene on earth. The soul's daughter, now an elderly woman, was keeping a lock of her deceased mother's hair in a small silver reliquary. Every day, this daughter would open the reliquary, touch the hair, weep over it, and speak to her mother as though she were present in that physical fragment. What Saint Teresa understood from that vision shook her to her very core. The soul of that mother could not fully release its bodily identity because a literal part of its body was still being venerated, touched, and wept over on earth. It was as though that lock of hair was functioning as an anchor, preventing the soul from fully recognizing that its body was finished, that its physical identity had come to an end, and that it was now spirit in the process of purification. Catholic teaching has always held that the body and soul are profoundly united during earthly life, but that at death this union is dissolved until the final resurrection. The body returns to dust, the soul sets out on its journey toward God. This separation, though painful, is necessary and holy. But when we preserve fragments of the deceased's body, especially when we treat them with an almost religious reverence, we are mystically interfering with that necessary separation. We are not speaking here of the relics of canonized saints, which are an entirely different matter. The Church venerates the relics of saints because those souls are already glorified in heaven. Their separation from the body is complete, and their physical remains have become instruments of grace approved by ecclesiastical authority. But a lock of your grandmother's hair, however saintly she may have been in life, is not a relic in any theological sense. It is a bodily fragment belonging to a soul that in all likelihood is still in the process of purification, and keeping it generates spiritual confusion. Saint Teresa was especially emphatic about ashes kept in inappropriate ways. The Church does permit families to keep ashes, but lays down very clear conditions. They must be placed in sacred settings, or if kept at home, treated with the reverence due to human remains, never divided, never turned into jewelry or keepsakes, never scattered according to personal sentiment, rather than being properly consecrated. When these norms are disregarded, when ashes are stored in a bedside drawer, worn in lockets, or scattered in places of sentimental significance, rather than being appropriately blessed, the same spiritual problem arises as with the lock of hair. Saint Teresa's vision showed her something even more sobering. These practices do not only affect the soul of the departed, they also affect the spiritual life of the person keeping those remains. They generate an unhealthy form of grief that does not allow the mourner to reach a healthy closure. The person who keeps that lock of hair, who touches it constantly, who venerates it as an almost magical means of connection with the deceased, cannot move forward in their own process of acceptance and Christian hope. They become trapped in a kind of denial, which, while entirely understandable on a human level, is spiritually destructive. Catalina de Mendoza, a noble lady from Toledo who had lost her only son at the age of 8, kept for 15 years a lock of the boy's hair and his baby teeth in a small gold box that she carried with her at all times. She formed the habit of speaking to those remains, of kissing them each night, of treating them as though her son were somehow present within them. Her spiritual life came to a complete standstill. She could not pray. She could not find comfort. She lived in a perpetual grief that was slowly consuming her. When she finally came to Saint Teresa seeking direction, the saint asked something that seemed impossible: to have those remains properly buried with a priestly blessing and to stop treating them as a charm connecting her to her dead son. She explained that by keeping those physical fragments, she was not honoring her son. She was keeping him bound to an identity that was no longer his. The boy needed his mother to allow him to be fully spirit, not to hold him in pieces of physical matter. Catalina's resistance was immense. To bury that hair and those teeth felt like burying her son a second time, like losing him all over again. But Saint Teresa answered her with a truth that changed everything. You do not lose him by letting go of what remains of his body. You set him free, and you free yourself. The love that holds on is not really love, it is fear in disguise. True love has the courage to let go, so that the other can fly to God. When Catalina finally surrendered those remains to be blessed and properly buried, she experienced something she had not felt in 15 years: peace. And that very night, she dreamed of her son for the first time without anguish. In the dream, the boy was smiling at her, free, radiant, luminous, and he said just one word: thank you. This is the 5th object Saint Teresa revealed. And now that you know all 5, it is time to understand the deeper spiritual meaning that unites them, why each one acts as an invisible chain, and how together they can hold a soul suspended at the threshold between this world and heaven. Now that you know the 5 objects Saint Teresa revealed in her mystical visions, it is time to understand the profound spiritual principle that unites them. The invisible mechanism by which these seemingly harmless objects become chains, preventing a soul from advancing toward its eternal home. This is not superstition or folk belief. It is a theological truth the Church has always held, but rarely explained clearly to ordinary believers. Through her mystical experiences, Saint Teresa came to understand that the process of purification in purgatory is not merely a passive suffering endured while the soul waits to be cleansed. It is also an active process of detachment, a progressive unfolding of identification with everything that constituted earthly life. The soul must learn to release its name, its face, its family role, its possessions, its disordered attachments, its bodily identity, even its particular devotional practices, in order to assume its one true identity, beloved child of God. This process of letting go is naturally painful, but it is designed by divine mercy to be as brief and complete as possible. However, when objects on earth continue to keep the deceased's earthly identity intensely alive, when those objects are conserved, venerated, and clung to, that process becomes complicated, prolonged, more difficult. Not because God punishes the soul for what its loved ones do, but because the soul itself perceives those objects as constant reminders of everything it must release. The 5 objects Saint Teresa revealed represent 5 dimensions of earthly identity that the soul must transcend. Personal jewelry and adornments represent social identity and bodily attachment. Clothing and intimate garments represent physical and sensory identity. Photographs arranged as altars represent visual identity, and the perpetuation of family roles. Personal devotional objects represent concrete spiritual identity and particular forms of piety. Physical remains represent material identity itself, attachment to the body that no longer exists. When these 5 types of objects remain on earth, being venerated, touched, kept as relics by people who have not yet reached a healthy closure in their grief, they generate what Saint Teresa called echoes of identity. The soul in purgatory perceives these echoes mystically as calls that distract it from its purification. Not audible voices, not apparitions, simply spiritual presences that the soul detects and that constantly remind it of its former life at the very moment it should be releasing that life in order to be reborn in God. Imagine you are learning to swim in deep water. To move forward, you must let go of the side of the pool, trust the water, allow your body to adapt to an unfamiliar element. But if someone on the edge keeps calling your name, if they preserve your belongings exactly as you left them as though expecting you back, if they keep locks of your hair as though you were still somehow present, that constant calling makes you hesitate. It makes you look back. It prevents you from learning to swim. The 5 objects function in precisely this way. They are calls from the shore that prevent the soul from learning to move through the ocean of eternity. Saint Teresa observed that the souls most swiftly purified in purgatory are those whose loved ones on earth have reached a healthy closure in their grief. They have preserved the loving memory of the departed, but they have not turned their belongings into shrines. They may have kept 1 or 2 photographs in a family album, but have not built photographic altars. They have donated the clothing and personal effects to those in need. They have returned the devotional objects to the church. They have ensured any physical remains are properly and reverently interred. And above all, they have redirected their love from the object to the person. They no longer love the things of the deceased. They love the deceased, and they express that love by praying for them directly to God. This healthy letting go does not mean forgetting. It is not a failure of love. On the contrary, it is the purest expression of Christian love, desiring the good of the other above our own consolation. It is finding the courage to say, I love you so much that I want you to be completely free, even if that freedom means I have nothing of yours left to touch, nothing to see, nothing to hold on to. I let you go so that you can reach God without obstacle. Saint Teresa's revelation about these 5 objects is not meant to generate guilt in those who have kept them for years or even decades. The vast majority of people have done so out of the most genuine love, the most natural grief, the most human need to hold on to something tangible belonging to someone no longer physically present. There is no sin in that impulse, only an unawareness of the spiritual consequences. But now that this knowledge has been brought to you, a new responsibility rests with you. You can no longer act from ignorance. You know that those kept jewels, that preserved clothing, those venerated photographs, those rosaries treated as relics, those preserved locks of hair, are functioning as invisible chains. And if you truly love the departed, if you desire their eternal good above your own temporal comfort, then you know what you must do. Saint Teresa did not leave this teaching incomplete. She did not simply name the problem without offering the solution. She knew that many people, upon hearing these truths, would feel a mixture of recognition and despair. Recognition that yes, these objects are in their homes. Despair at not knowing what to do with them, how to remove them rightly, how to avoid making mistakes that might worsen the spiritual situation. That is why the saint left precise instructions, a complete spiritual protocol, for removing these objects in a way that truly sets the soul free, rather than dishonoring its memory. But before revealing that protocol, you need to understand something more. The signs the soul of the departed may be sending you right now from purgatory. The subtle manifestations that indicate it is being held back by these objects. The ways in which it is trying to communicate, without words, its desperate need to be released. Because what may be happening in your home at this very moment, those experiences you may have attributed to coincidence or imagination, could in fact be the silent plea of a soul you love, asking you to let it go. For centuries, the Discalced Carmelites have documented testimonies from families experiencing inexplicable phenomena following the death of a loved one. These are not dramatic ghostly apparitions or supernatural spectacles. They are subtle, everyday signs, so ordinary that many people normalize them, never grasping their true spiritual significance. Saint Teresa identified these signs as the ways in which the soul of the departed attempts to communicate its need to be freed from the objects holding it back. The most frequently reported sign, present in more than 80% of families who are keeping the 5 types of objects revealed, is recurring dreams about the deceased, but not just any dream. These are specific. The loved one appears restless, searching for something, repeating actions without completing them, or expressing discomfort without clear words. The person who wakes from these dreams carries an inexplicable heaviness, as though the departed had been trying urgently to say something, but could not quite get through. Maria de Jesus, a Carmelite who worked directly alongside Saint Teresa, documented the case of a widow who dreamed every night of her husband moving through the house, opening drawers, touching objects, looking at her with pleading eyes. For months, the widow interpreted these dreams as signs that her husband missed her or was watching over her. Only when a confessor explained Saint Teresa's teaching did she understand the truth. Her husband was not trying to stay. He was trying to show her the objects she needed to release. The second common sign is a persistent sense of presence in the home. Not visible apparitions, not frightening phenomena, simply a constant subtle feeling that someone is in the room, that someone is watching, that the house is not entirely empty even when physically it is. This feeling tends to intensify in the places where the deceased's objects are kept. The wardrobe with their clothes, the table where their photograph stands surrounded by candles, the jewelry box holding their rings. Teresa Lopez, the widow from Salamanca mentioned earlier, described this experience with unsettling precision. Every time she entered her bedroom where her husband's crucifix was kept, she felt a presence so real that she would turn, half expecting to see him. It was not fear she felt. It was a strange mixture of comfort and unease. Part of her wanted to believe her husband was there, watching over her. Another part sensed that something was not right, that this presence was not a sign of protection, but of a soul held in place. The third sign is unexplained temperature changes in specific parts of the home. Families report cold drafts in closed rooms, always in the same spots, particularly near where the deceased's objects are kept. While science might point to air currents or insulation differences, the consistency and specificity of these experiences suggests something more. Saint Teresa taught that the soul in purgatory undergoes the purifying fire, and when it remains bound to earthly objects, its mystical proximity to those objects can manifest as abnormal thermal sensations. A particularly common sign among those who keep jewelry and clothing of the deceased is an inexplicable physical discomfort when touching those objects. People who once found comfort in wearing a late spouse's ring or holding their shirt suddenly begin to feel a strange unease when they do so. Not revulsion, more like a sense that the object no longer wants to be touched, that it no longer belongs in this world. Some describe a feeling of heaviness or cold when handling these belongings. Others simply sense that something has shifted and it no longer feels right to hold on. Objects found in places where no one placed them constitute the fifth documented sign among the Carmelites. Photographs found fallen with no explanation. Jewelry discovered outside of its box when no one took it out. Clothing found disarranged in a wardrobe that had been left in order. The natural explanation might be forgetfulness or accidental disturbance, But when these things happen repeatedly and specifically with the deceased's belongings, they carry a spiritual meaning that should not be dismissed. Saint Teresa explained that these movements are not caused directly by the soul of the departed physically moving objects. They are manifestations of the spiritual tension that exists when an earthly object mystically holds a soul that needs to be free. That tension can make itself known in the material world in subtle ways, especially when the living person has a heightened spiritual sensitivity or is in a state of deep prayer. The sixth sign, reported particularly by those who keep the deceased's devotional objects, is an inability to pray in peace while using them. A woman praying the rosary that belonged to her deceased mother begins experiencing constant distraction, intrusive thoughts, and inability to settle. Another who reads from her late father's Bible feels an inexplicable restlessness every time she opens it. It is not that these objects are cursed or harmful in themselves. It is that the soul of the departed perceives their use, and that perception creates a spiritual resonance that interferes with the prayer of whoever is using them. Unexplained headaches, sleeplessness with no medical cause, a melancholy that does not respond to human comfort or spiritual consolation. These form the seventh category of signs. Many people who are keeping the 5 types of objects develop these symptoms without any identifiable physical or emotional cause. Doctors find nothing. Counselors cannot locate a specific trauma. But when those people appropriately remove the deceased's objects, the symptoms often disappear with surprising speed. Saint Teresa cautioned that not all of these signs will appear in every situation, and that their presence should not be interpreted as divine punishment or as any malicious action on the part of the deceased. The soul in purgatory cannot harm anyone. It has neither that power nor that intention. What occurs is far more subtle. The soul's condition of spiritual retention generates a disturbance in the natural order that can surface in physical, emotional, or perceptual ways for those spiritually connected to it. The 8th and most sobering sign is the repetition of patterns of suffering. Families who lose a loved one and keep their belongings begin to experience the same kinds of difficulties the deceased faced in life. If the person died of heart trouble, several family members develop cardiac symptoms with no clear genetic predisposition. If they suffered from depression, a shadow of melancholy seems to settle over the household. If there were unresolved conflicts, those same conflicts resurface among the living in inexplicable ways. This is not coincidence, and it is not hereditary fate. Saint Teresa identified it as a form of pathological spiritual sympathy. When the soul of the departed cannot release its earthly identity because of the objects being kept, its condition of purifying suffering resonates mystically with those who maintain those objects, creating echoes of its pain in their own lives. If, as you have been listening to these signs, you have recognized 1, 2, or several of them in your own experience, now you understand their true meaning. You are not imagining things. You are not losing your mind. It is not coincidence. It is the soul of someone you love trying to reach you in the only way it can, with a silent and desperate plea. Let me go. But this raises a crucial question that many people arrive at by this point. If I decide to remove these objects, how do I do it? Because there is a right way, and there are wrong ways that can make things worse. The urgency you may feel right now to immediately remove the deceased's objects from your home is entirely understandable. Now that you know the truth Saint Teresa revealed, now that you have recognized the signs, you want to act without delay to set your loved one free. But this is precisely where many Catholic families make serious mistakes that, rather than helping the soul, compound its situation and bring unexpected consequences. The first mistake, and the most common, is throwing the deceased's objects in the rubbish bin as though they were ordinary waste. The reasoning seems logical. If these objects are holding the soul back, get rid of them as fast as possible. But this action, however well-intentioned, constitutes a profound lack of respect toward the memory of the departed and toward the objects themselves, some of which have intrinsic sacred value, such as devotional items. Saint Teresa was clear on this. Removing does not mean discarding with contempt. The deceased's belongings, though they must leave the possession of the living, remain deserving of respect because they were associated with a person loved by God. Throwing them in the rubbish without any ceremony, without blessing, without the right spiritual intention, is akin to profaning the memory of the departed. And spiritually, it can produce the opposite of the desired effect. Rather than freeing the soul, it disturbs it, because the soul perceives the contempt being shown toward what was once its own. Catalina Sanchez, a widow from Valladolid, who had heard fragments of Saint Teresa's teaching, decided one afternoon to dispose of all her deceased husband's clothing by throwing it into bin bags for the municipal rubbish collection. That very night she experienced the most disturbing dream of her life. Her husband appeared to her naked, humiliated, repeating, "Why have you done this to me?" She could not sleep in peace for weeks until a priest explained that she had acted hastily and without the correct spiritual disposition. The second grave error is burning the objects without prior priestly blessing. Some people, influenced by popular practices mixing Catholicism with superstition, believe that burning a loved one's belongings releases their spirit. They light bonfires in the garden and throw in clothing, photographs, even sacred objects like rosaries and Bibles, believing the fire will purify everything. This act, beyond the obvious fire hazard, is spiritually problematic for several reasons. First, burning blessed objects without a priest appropriately removing the blessing constitutes a serious disrespect toward the Church's sacramentals. A blessed rosary, a Bible, a crucifix cannot simply be thrown into a fire like ordinary rubbish. Second, fire as a symbol of purification carries a specific meaning in Catholic theology that cannot be applied magically according to our own interpretations. Third, burning the photographs and belongings of the deceased without the correct spiritual intention may be perceived by the soul as an act of erasure, of annihilation of its memory, which generates disturbance rather than peace. Saint Teresa documented the case of a noble family who burned all the belongings of their deceased patriarch in a private ceremony conducted without priestly involvement, believing they were setting him free. For months, the house became the scene of unsettling phenomena. The smell of smoke with no identifiable source, a constant sense of an agitated presence, and dreams in which the patriarch appeared surrounded by flames, calling for help. Only when they consulted a priest knowledgeable in these matters and carried out an appropriate reparative protocol did peace return to the household. The third error is giving away or selling the deceased's objects without any prior spiritual purification. The reasoning sounds generous. If I shouldn't keep these things, at least let someone else benefit from them. Jewelry is passed to distant relatives, clothing donated to those in need, valuable objects sold on. But what is not understood is that these objects carry a spiritual imprint of the deceased, and when they pass to other people without being appropriately purified first, they can transmit that imprint and generate unexpected effects. It is not that the objects are cursed or inherently dangerous. It is that they retain a spiritual resonance belonging to the soul that was bound to them. When they pass to other people, without having been neutralized through blessing and prayer, the new person may begin to experience phenomena similar to those of whoever had been keeping them. Dreams about a deceased person they never knew, inexplicable discomfort when using those objects, or a sense of unease they cannot explain. The Carmelites of Seville documented the case of a woman who bought a beautiful silver rosary at an antiques market and began using it in her daily prayers. Shortly afterwards, she started having recurring dreams about an unknown elderly woman who who was asking her to pray for her. The dreams intensified until they became disturbing. When she consulted her confessor and he blessed the rosary with a specific prayer for the soul of whoever had previously owned it, the dreams stopped immediately. The fourth error is hiding the objects rather than removing them definitively. Families who cannot quite bring themselves to part with the deceased's belongings, but who have heard they ought not to keep them, opt for a middle ground, storing them in the cellar, the attic, or sealed boxes that no one will ever open. They believe that if the objects are out of sight, the spiritual problem disappears. But Saint Teresa taught that what matters is not the physical visibility of the objects. It is their continued existence in the family's possession. The soul in purgatory perceives those objects mystically, even if they are hidden in the most remote corner of the house. It is not physical sight that creates the bond of retention. It is the intention to keep. As long as the objects remain the family's property, as long as it remains possible to retrieve them, as long as they have not been truly released through a definitive act of surrender, the spiritual effect of retention continues. The fifth error, a particularly serious one, is removing the objects with resentment or with a sense of being compelled to do something unjust. Some people, upon hearing this teaching, feel anger. They feel they are being asked to make an excessive sacrifice, that the one source of consolation they had after their loss is being taken from them. They proceed to dispose of the objects, but they do so with bitterness, with a sense of injustice, some even inwardly blaming the departed for causing this problem. This interior disposition renders the act of removal spiritually ineffective or even counterproductive. Saint Teresa taught that what frees the soul is not merely the physical act of removing the objects, but the loving intention with which it is done. It must be an act of sacrificial love, of genuine desire for the departed's eternal good, of understanding that we are doing something difficult but necessary for their spiritual freedom. Done with resentment, the act loses its liberating power. The sixth and final error is acting entirely alone, without spiritual counsel, without priestly accompaniment, without communal prayer. Some people, driven by urgency or embarrassed to raise these matters with a priest, decide to implement on their own what they have heard about Saint Teresa's teaching. They improvise rituals, invent prayers, make hurried decisions without discernment. Saint Teresa always insisted that these delicate spiritual matters must be handled with the guidance of the Church, not because lay people are incapable of acting rightly, but because wise spiritual direction protects against mistakes, against excessive scrupulosity, against misinterpretation. A priest with knowledge of these teachings can discern which specific objects need to be removed in each particular case, how to do so appropriately, which prayers to use, and how to accompany a family through a process that is spiritually significant yet emotionally demanding. If you have recognized that you are about to make one or more of these mistakes, do not feel guilty or ashamed. Now you know what not to do. And most importantly, you now need to know what you should do. Saint Teresa did not leave the faithful without practical guidance. In her letters to Carmelite prioresses and in private instructions preserved in the convent archives, she set out a specific protocol for correctly removing the 5 types of objects that hold a soul back. This protocol combines physical action with the right spiritual disposition and must be followed with patience and reverence. The first step is interior preparation. Before touching any object, set aside time for personal prayer, asking God for the grace to act out of true love, neither out of self-centered attachment nor out of resentment. Pray a full rosary for the repose of the departed soul, specifically offering this act of letting go as a suffragan prayer for their purification. Saint Teresa recommended doing this for 3 consecutive days before taking any physical action. The second step is to consult a priest. Not every priest will necessarily be familiar with these mystical teachings but seek one with spiritual sensitivity and solid formation. Explain which objects belonging to the deceased you have been keeping and your intention to release them in accordance with Saint Teresa's teaching. Ask him to bless this process and to advise you if any particular objects require special treatment. The third step is to sort the objects according to their nature. Blessed objects, rosaries, Bibles, crucifixes, scapulars, should be returned to the church so that a priest may appropriately remove their blessings and direct them to liturgical use, or have them buried in consecrated ground. They must never be thrown in the rubbish or burned without priestly involvement. Jewelry and valuables may be donated to charitable works after being blessed with holy water and prayer for the deceased. Clothing should be washed one final time with the intention of purification, blessed with holy water, and then donated to people in need or to charitable institutions. Photographs require particular discernment. If you have created a photographic altar, dismantle it with reverence. Keep 1 or 2 photographs in an ordinary family album, but remove those that were surrounded by candles and devotional objects. Surplus photographs may be passed to other family members or kept in a closed album, never displayed as objects of veneration. Physical remains, such as locks of hair or ashes, kept inappropriately should be entrusted to a priest for burial in blessed ground with appropriate liturgical prayer. This is the most emotionally demanding step, but also the most spiritually liberating. Throughout the entire process, Saint Teresa recommended repeating this prayer, which she herself composed. Lord Jesus, through your infinite mercy, release the soul of your servant from all attachment to earthly things. May this act of love which I now perform be accepted as a prayer for their purification. May they soon reach your glorious presence. Amen. The complete protocol may take days or weeks. It should not be rushed. Each object released is an act of sacrificial love that carries eternal value for the soul you love. What takes place in the very moment you correctly release the deceased's objects, following the protocol revealed by Saint Teresa, is one of the most beautiful manifestations of divine mercy. You cannot see it with physical eyes, but it is as real as the resurrection itself. The soul experiences an immediate liberation from the invisible chains that had been holding it to its earthly identity, and can at last concentrate fully on its purification, without distraction, without calls from the earth, without echoes of what it once was. Saint Teresa described the soul's experience in a luminous image she herself received in a mystical vision. She said that a soul retained by earthly objects is like a bird tied by invisible threads to multiple branches. The bird can flutter its wings, it can try to fly, but each thread holds it back and pulls it down, preventing it from rising. When the objects are released with love and the correct intention, those threads are cut one by one, and when the last thread is severed, the soul experiences a sudden soaring, a spiritual ascent that draws it dramatically closer to the divine presence. The Carmelites who worked directly alongside Saint Teresa documented extraordinary testimonies from families who applied this protocol. The pattern is consistent and striking. Within hours or days of releasing the objects, the living person experiences clear signs that something fundamental has shifted in the spiritual condition of the departed. The most common sign is a farewell dream, completely unlike the restless, troubled dreams that came before. The deceased appears in peace, luminous, often bathed in white or golden light, smiling with a serenity never present in the earlier dreams. They say little, they ask for nothing. They simply look with deep love and gratitude. Sometimes just one word is spoken. Thank you. Peace. Free. The person wakes from this dream not with heaviness, but with an inner certainty that their loved one is well, that something fundamental has been resolved. Teresa Marquez, a mother from Burgos who had lost her 15-year-old daughter and had kept for 7 years a lock of her hair, her favorite clothing, and photographs surrounded by candles. followed the complete protocol with her confessor's guidance. The night after she released the final object, she dreamed of her daughter walking toward a brilliant light, turning one last time to smile at her and saying clearly, "Mom, now I can finally get there." Teresa awoke in tears, but entirely different tears from those she had wept for 7 years. They were tears of relief, of peace, of certainty that she had done the right thing. The second common manifestation is the immediate disappearance of the unsettling phenomena the family had been experiencing. The sense of a restless presence in the house dissipates entirely. The unexplained temperature changes cease. Objects stop shifting mysteriously. The house regains an atmosphere of normality and peace it had lost since the death. It is as though an invisible tension that had permeated the entire home is suddenly released. Families who had suffered from insomnia, unexplained headaches, and persistent melancholy report that these symptoms vanish with remarkable speed after releasing the objects. This is not a placebo effect or self-suggestion. It is the physical manifestation of a restored spiritual order, the end of the disturbance caused by the soul's retention. The third sign, particularly moving, is the recovery of the ability to remember the departed with joy, not only with pain. While the objects were in place, generating spiritual retention, the memory of the deceased was shadowed by anguish, by grief that would not end, by a sense of loss that felt permanent. But after the objects are correctly released, something shifts profoundly in the emotional memory. The person can think of their loved one, recall shared moments, and experience gratitude and even joy alongside the natural sadness. The grief completes its healthy journey. Saint Teresa explained that this happens because when the soul of the departed is at peace and advancing in its purification without obstacle, it mystically transmits that peace to those who loved it on earth. The bond of love between the living and the dead does not end with death. It is transformed. And when that bond is freed from pathological retention, it becomes a channel of mutual grace. The living help the departed through their prayers and acts of sacrifice, and the departed, once in heaven, will intercede for the living in return. But Saint Teresa revealed something more about what happens when a soul is finally freed from its earthly objects. She saw in her mystical visions that the time of purification in purgatory is dramatically shortened. A soul that might have remained in purification for decades due to the retention caused by objects being kept can complete that process in months or even weeks once freed. Not because God was punishing the soul for what its relatives did, but because the soul itself can work far more effectively at its purification when it is no longer distracted by calls from the earth. Imagine you are studying for the most important exam of your life, but your phone keeps ringing with calls from people you love asking you to come home. Your love for them makes you hesitate, look up from your books, and wonder whether you ought to go back. A study session that could have been completed in days stretches into months of interruption. But when those people understand that the best thing they can do for you is to let you study in peace, when they stop calling and instead send quiet words of encouragement, your concentration returns, and you complete quickly what once seemed impossible. This is precisely how it works when you release the objects. You are not abandoning the soul. You are not forgetting it. You love it so much that you have the courage to allow it to concentrate on its purification without interruption. And that sacrificial love is abundantly rewarded. The soul reaches the presence of God more swiftly, and from there, it can intercede for you with far greater power than it ever could while retained in purgatory. The testimonies gathered by the Carmelites include cases of souls who, after being set free through the removal of objects, appeared in dreams to their families to announce that they had reached heaven and could now truly help them. A mother who had retained her son through objects for 15 years finally released them following Saint Teresa's protocol. 3 months later, she dreamed of her son clothed in light, saying to her, "Mom, now I can truly protect you. Thank you for letting me get here." This is the final fruit of applying Saint Teresa's revelation about the 5 objects. You do not lose your loved one. You gain them at a deeper level. You do not forget them. You help them reach their eternal home. You do not betray their memory. You honor it in the most authentic way possible, by desiring their eternal good above your own temporal comfort. And now that you know all of this truth, your responsibility is eternal, because what you do today with the objects in your home will shape the rest of your loved one's journey and the peace of your own heart. You have reached the end of this message that Saint Teresa of Avila has left for you across the centuries. It is no accident that you heard these words today. In the mystery of God's providence, this knowledge has come into your life at the precise moment your soul was ready to receive it, and at the moment when your loved one in purgatory most needed you to hear it. The revelation of the 5 objects a Christian must never keep from someone who has died is not a burden. It is a liberation. It sets the soul of the departed free from the invisible chains holding it back. It sets you free from a grief that was preventing your peace. And it sets the love between you both free to flow in its purest form, the mutual desire for the other's eternal good. You now know that personal jewelry and adornments, clothing and intimate garments, photographs turned into altars, devotional objects treated as relics, and physical remains kept in inappropriate ways. All of these are anchors preventing the soul from soaring toward God. You also know that releasing them does not mean forgetting or betraying. It means loving with the courage of Christian detachment. You have learned to recognize the signs the soul sends when it is asking for your help. The troubled dreams, the sense of presence, the inexplicable phenomena that occur in your home. You will no longer interpret these as signs that your loved one is watching over you protectively, but as silent pleas from a soul that needs your love, expressed in the liberating act of letting go. You know the mistakes to avoid when releasing these objects. Do not discard them with contempt. Do not burn them without blessing. Do not pass them on without purification. Do not simply hide them thinking that resolves the matter. Do not act with bitterness. And above all, do not proceed without spiritual guidance. And you know the sacred protocol Saint Teresa established for doing this rightly, with love, with reverence, with the interior disposition that transforms a painful act into a powerful prayer. Most beautifully of all, you know what happens when you finally act. The soul experiences immediate liberation, deep peace, and a renewed capacity to advance in its purification. And you receive clear signs of that liberation. A luminous farewell dream, the lifting of unsettling phenomena, the return of joy in remembering, and the quiet inner certainty that you have done what love required. Your path forward is clear. Do not delay what you now know must be done. Speak with your confessor, begin the protocol of prayer, and with love release the objects that are holding back the soul of someone you cherish. And when you have done so, share this teaching with others who may also be keeping a departed loved one's belongings, not knowing the spiritual weight of that choice. If you would like to go deeper into Saint Teresa's teachings on purgatory and the souls of the faithful departed, subscribe to this channel, where you will find more of the mystical revelations the Church has preserved for the benefit of all believers. May God's mercy accompany you on your journey, and may the souls you love be free to reach His presence.